YouTube for the first week after its launch was supposed to be a dating site, right? It was supposed to be a dating service. And so we were there, and this is in like April, May of 2005, after a week launching it. And you don't rate the videos with stars, if you rated it with hearts, and it was like searching for like who you're searching for rather than. And after a week, zero videos uploaded, there was like another meeting about like, should we transform this? Should we, one, shut this down, or do we just evolve this into a place where you can upload anything you wanted?
Welcome to Building Champions for Life, where we dive into the minds of extraordinary leaders, trailblazers, and champions from every corner of the world. I'm your host, Kirk Spahn, and together we're going to meet with visionaries who've conquered challenges, shattered ceilings, and redefined what's possible. From sports, tech, entertainment, to entrepreneurship, our guests have one thing in common. They are building legacies of greatness, and they're here to share their passion and their process with you. Welcome to the show. Hello and Happy New Year. Welcome to 2026 to everyone. We are here at Building Champions for Life. And to start off the new year, we thought, what better way than to kick it off with an old friend who spends most of his time in Asia, but is now in the States very briefly, who has had an amazing career that is, while he's still young and growing, is pretty transformative, since many of you end up watching this from a small place called YouTube. We actually have one of the founders of YouTube here. It's been an honor to call him a friend and to hear about his journey. We both share a lot of passions, one in particular for the sport of tennis and skiing, and kind of the mantra of building champions for life. Steve has just embodied that his whole career. He moved to the U.S. at a young age with his family from Taiwan. He's actually back there with his family now, but came in and started working in tech. And it's so interesting that when you're passionate about something and you kind of find a solution to something you think needs fixing, or something that people may or may not kind of explore, to fast forward to the reality is, I read today that whatever generation we're on, Generation Alpha, that it was a staggering statistic that more than 30% of kids these days, when they ask, what do you want to do? They literally say the words, I want to be a YouTuber. I'll just start with, what does that even make you like? What would a Steve Chen from 15, 20 years ago with this thought here, to think that fast forward less than 2 decades and you are in the zeitgeist that people want to be YouTubers?
No, I mean, I would say, well, thanks for inviting me, right? And I think it's fascinating to talk about this story, because I think that it is a lot that's happened, but compressed into a small, relatively short period of time. From the period that I started out planting seeds in Silicon Valley, moving from Chicago to Silicon Valley, in like 1999, that was about the period when I think like all these services that we now use almost on a daily basis, like multiple times throughout the day, they were still there were a lot of naysayers out there that were saying whether or not this was even possible on the internet, right? I mean, I think that if you were listening to this, like, if you like music, how do you actually listen to music? And have you ever held a tape player or a CD player or a CD in your hand? And how quickly that transformed. So like us in our generation all having
a yellow sody
records or tapes or CD collections, and then just in a period of like few years that completely transformed into just streaming audio, whether it's Spotify, whether it's YouTube Music, whether it's like Apple Music, but it's some kind of streaming form. It's the same thing with what we've seen with smartphones. I think that is now what we're carrying in our pockets. It's just like more powerful than anything that we had when we were growing up in our entire house in terms of electronics. Now we can carry one device that can do everything. And it's continued to kind of be this going back and forth between technology advances and revolutions, and then the kind of the ideas and products and services that are built on top of that to employ that technology. And I think YouTube is an excellent example of that, where again, like there were more naysayers in 2005 when we launched YouTube, which was everybody at that time. We still had TVs at that time. We were whether it was a cable television or watching like maybe VHS and DVDs, tapes. And I think like at the time when YouTube was launching, the internet was barely enough in terms of the broadband penetration. So it was still pretty slow. It was still a couple years before the iPhone. So it was still relatively challenging just to even capture videos. And then, this is before the iPhone again. So you had to go back to your computer, sync it all up to your computer. There's a lot of work that goes behind it.
If anyone remembers the word buffering, I mean, I remember, to think about if you wanted to download a show, it was a good 3-hour process for like a 30-minute sitcom back then.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's fascinating that going kind of back and forth, and I think that like my sort of the era that I was in Silicon Valley, I was so fortunate. It just happened to be like probably one of the most. I mean, Silicon Valley obviously precedes when I went there in 1999 by many, many decades, and so a lot of that was already in place. But that definitely was a period of that sort of 20 years from 1999 to 2019 when I left to move to Asia. That was a period of sort of this transition of there was a lot of these dot-com companies. There was a dot-com crash that happened around 1999, 2000, where a lot of these naysayers were coming out and saying, see what we said? Like, we told you none of these were going to work. And it took about 4 or 5 years. At the time, I was working at a company called PayPal. And it took about 4 or 5 years from around 2000 to 2004 and 5 before the investors started getting more of their LPs to invest in these companies again. And it took a while. I mean, the crash happened in a mere months, but then it took about 4 or 5 years for it to start crawling back. And I think
people that may remember that company at PayPal had a couple names in it besides yourself that were there. A guy named Elon Musk and pretty much the PayPal mafia, as they were referred to. It was a unique time. I don't think we've ever talked about it, but in 1999, when you were joining them, I was working for a butler named Ask Jeeves in Emeryville. Have you ever asked Jeeves? So we were. Yes, we could go offline and talk a lot about that. And I think it's interesting to point out, while we were both there at the same time, I kind of had my Jeeves experience and then left. And you were building up and you started PayPal. I believe that's where, if I remember, you said you met your co-founders for YouTube.
Right, exactly. And so while we started YouTube as new co-founders of a new company in 2005, we had already been working together for a period of 5 to 6 years prior to that. And so it was 3 co-founders of the company, 2 other co-founders, and we'd all worked together on multiple projects. And so we saw that there was that nice union of us working together, collaborating together. And we'd met in, again, this sort of token Silicon Valley garage, talking about what do we want to do next after leaving PayPal. And I think that was also, you mentioned a little bit about PayPal Mafia. Many of those companies that were started, whether it's Reid Hoffman with LinkedIn, whether it's SpaceX and Tesla with Elon, a lot of the things with Peter Thiel, Sequoia Capital on the venture capital side, and Yelp. And there's just a long list of these companies that all kind of happen around that sort of 2004, 2005 period, as I think that there was the PayPal was going through an acquisition with eBay. And I think everybody was feeling a little bit too, energized and too young to retire. And so I like all of those guys that started something out of PayPal. I think the one thing was like to have seen what it was like to get through those hurdles when everybody around you was kind of telling you that there's no way that the internet was going to survive, that you're going to build a payment service that's going to eclipse the credit card services that already exist today. And PayPal itself had to go through a lot of evolutionary periods in from the original idea of sort of pay. At the time, this is way back, there was a thing before the iPhone called the Palm Pilot, and the idea there was that, and this is kind of an iPhone, but wasn't connected to the internet. It had this
Palm
stylus.
Pilot
It was an
Trio.
awkward little device.
I had the Trio, the Palm Pilot Trio.
Yeah, so like that at that time it was more about look this vision that everybody in the world was going to own one of these Palm Pilots. And then when we went out to eat at a restaurant, when somebody pays with their credit cards, the three, four other people wanted to pay that person back, but there's no way to be able to pay that exact amount. So let's write an app for the Palm Pilot. Let's call it PayPal. And then we'll make it so everybody else can beam that person $10, $15 for that amount of cash. And then it was a last minute thought, like 2 days before the Palm Pilot app launch, that we've said, why don't we just, it seems like browsers are beginning to pick up with the internet. Like, why don't we just make a version of this? The back end for all those payments were already in place. And so why don't we just tap this into making it a website? And then a few months, it's not even a year. I mean, we're talking like 8, 9 months passed by and nobody's using the Palm Pilot anymore. And we saw and there's a few stages skyrocketing use on the web, but really, I think the moment was, and we can talk about this with YouTube as well. It's like, I think there's the idea of P2P payments, person to person payments, but you need to still find a utility. And it was hard to imagine at that time, like, do we go after, what kind of markets do you kind of go after? And the natural fit ended up being auctions, with eBay being the primary service for hosting auctions. And for auctions, again, you put something that you wanted to sell on the market, you take a few photos, you describe the item, and that's all taken care of with eBay. But the part that every auction needs at the end of it is a payment service. And I think before PayPal came out, they were still writing checks and mailing those checks to somebody. I think like through some kind of like escrow service, like, is that person is going to cash the check, and is we really going to send that item over? And so that ended up being a natural fit for the service, right? And I think that YouTube itself, like, we were first thinking like there's a lot of work that goes in behind the scenes for something like YouTube to be able to upload any video that's taken on any kind of device with any kind of all the different types of encoding music, all the music and video and audio, and then transcoding that into one format that can play inside the browser without having to download something. Being able to do all that stuff with the CPU, with the memory, with the bandwidth. And this is still before cloud computing. So we had to be there to plug in, order these machines months in advance to plug everything in. And so there was
you were the CTO, because I want to talk about these hurdles. Like, first of all, you can tell this story forever. It's the coolest story like ever. And I didn't realize that, but I think this is an important lesson. There are a lot of kids listening that, like, you saw hurdles, like the people over there saw the hurdles at PayPal, and they're like, everyone might not see it, but there are a couple moments and that you went through. And I feel like when you said with YouTube, it's pretty obvious as well. It's like, will people do this? Will they take the time? Will this take hours? Like, do people actually want to put like their videos out there to do it? I mean, I'd love to talk about the early days, and I want to relate it a little bit, because this mindset that you had, I mean, we kind of glossed over because we got right into it, but like your background and this passion, and how did you develop this passion for this computer science and to tackle it in a way that is really, really so innovative? I mean, now it's not because everyone wants to do it, but back then, I mean, you were doing something that was, who knew that it would be so game changing? But how did you start out with getting into it, and how did you know that first passion started, and how did that become a purpose for you?
I mean, and I think that this is, I mean, I think my answer for that, I would say, to preface it, is more on an individual by individual basis. Like, I don't necessarily think that, look, I don't think this creating a startup is necessarily in the cards and the recipes for everybody to do. However, I would say this, that whether a startup succeeds or not, you can tell within 3 to 6 months. And we have many of those 3 to 6 month periods. And so while there is a huge failure rate for a startup to succeed, I think there are experiences that you get to be able to face firsthand that just can't be copied and emulated in any other way other than doing your own startup. And I would recommend everybody to try it at least once. And look, like, it's a 3 to 6 month period. it may work, it may not work, especially if you have an idea that's just brewing in your head. Definitely take that opportunity to be able to take that idea and throw it out there and see if it sticks, right? And I think that in the case of PayPal, I was saying that the original idea was so far, so distant from what it's become, and YouTube as well, what it was originally intended for versus after getting through all these hurdles on the technical side, from the scalability side, it continued to grow. And now looking back, especially what now in 2026, and seeing that, like you mentioned, like the number of people that would want to aspire to become a YouTube creator, to be able to do the monetization, to do the payouts, to be able to do that model where you have this economic system that's built in where the content creators and the platform, YouTube platform, and the advertisers and the viewers, they all merge together and they all play happily, right? And I think that's one of these cases where it's usually very difficult to get the advertisers, the content creators, and the viewers to be all happy at once. And I think to be able to create an ecosystem like that is very challenging.
It's also magical. I mean, it's sort of a Disney-esque thing, right? There has to be this imagination. And take us a little bit under the hood. I guess if you want to go back to a 16-year-old Steve, or even when you were sitting in that, as we've all done as entrepreneurs, in a roundtable platform with our buddies or potential co-founders, being like, what could this thing be? Like, shoot it at the wall, right? Like, what could it be? I mean, take us back to some of those, if you remember, the early sessions, because there's probably no way, even as brilliant as you are, that you could sort of predict that this would happen, but there were iterations and failures along the way and successes. But do you remember any funny anecdotes about those brainstorming sessions, or what you personally thought YouTube originally, or take us through sort of the genesis or something like that?
Well, I think it's important to know, I don't think this is often said, and often people don't realize that YouTube for the first week after its launch was supposed to be a dating site, right? It was supposed to be a dating service. And so we were there, and this is in April, May of 2005, after a week launching it. And you don't rate the videos with stars, you rate it with hearts, and it was searching for who you're searching for, rather than. And after a week, 0 videos uploaded, there was another meeting about should we transform this? Should we shut this down, or do we just evolve this into a place where you can upload anything you wanted?
Open the floodgates. It's sort of like PayPal, right? You had the back end. You're we have a platform. We did you were, I think, CTO. I mean, you were instrumental in building that back end. It's hey, this can take it. Why not? You sort of thought that there would be a purpose for it in the beginning, but then you realized, and this is a lesson just for entrepreneurs in general, that sometimes the evolution, what you think might be what catches or you're building it for, isn't, and you pivot. And I think a majority of these pivots are what make some of the greatest companies in the history of the world.
I think the pivoting, is the most important part. Is I think it's this delicate balance, right, between the confidence that you have in your own ideas, but also always keeping at least one ear open to the thoughts, the feedback, the opinions of others. And I think valuing that in some way. I mean, I wouldn't just toss any of it out, whether it's to the end user or your co-founders or the employees. I think that one thing that we did at YouTube was we always welcome, regardless of what your official job title was, we always welcome, the good ideas could come from anybody, whether it's on the customer service team, whether it's on the HR team, whether it's designer, whether it's UI. We never focused on just people there coming up with the actual products. We wanted the people that were actually using the product itself, and that was everybody within the company, when they were using the product. What feedback, what bugs, what did you think that we can do? What features can improve this, and what are you using it for? And all of that feedback was good. And I think that was a healthy part of this idea where everybody felt like they belonged as part of the product, while their everyday jobs was different from the person that sat next to them. We all believed in what we were building, and we were open to testing things. If it didn't work, it didn't work. But some of the best ideas, they may actually just come out of one of these coffee conversations.
And this is so much like an athlete mindset as well. I mean, this idea of a growth, people talk about growth mindset. We talk about it here. I mean, that in your world, people don't necessarily associate growth mindset with like a tech version, right? We talk a lot about it in other things, but you're describing exactly that. And so that correlation of the athlete growth mindset and evolution is pretty instrumental, right? I mean, it's the same, you and I talk a lot of tennis for a long time, but do you see those kind of the patterns, the synergies between what's going on as an entrepreneur and the athlete as well?
Yeah, and I think like especially I think it is calculated risks, but I think it's not risk free. Right. I mean, I think it's at every point along the way with the startups, you have enough. If you're self-funding it, you have enough money to last a few months, right? And it's just about making key decisions, but then also believing in others as well, like getting that feedback, very open to feedback, and then very open to criticism. I think like it's all healthy criticism, and so any of that criticism is like somebody that's using your product and giving you free feedback, and so take it, and then be able to see like how do you solve these issues, and then if you do have these key metrics that you do measure whether the success and the growth of the service that you're building out, pay attention to those and making sure that those are sustainable, those continue to grow, those are continuing to accelerate as you build out the features that you think the users are going to want. And if if at any point along the way, if that's not the case that it goes, then continue to always think about like what are things that we can do to introduce or pivots along the way that we can introduce to be able to further accelerate that growth.
It's so huge. I mean, this is the best advice for any entrepreneur, but as a person, I mean, I think, we always talk about that concept of building a champion for life, and a champion doesn't mean trophies or, what you put yourself into. It didn't mean YouTube and it's going to be this monster. I mean, you threw your energy in. So if you could go back to that 16-year-old Steve Chen before all this, and how are you personally driven? I mean, the process that you had, because you developed a core skill set. You're talking about things that you were instrumental in making. What was that like? When did you know that that was something you wanted to go? What was the path that you followed? When did you feel like, all right, I'm on to something. I'm part of something bigger. This is my kind of purpose.
I think it's a great question, right? And I do think that it's a little bit more of a personal adventure, personal story, right? Like, because like I do think that I bought a one-way ticket from Chicago, where I grew up, to San Francisco, and it was just going to work or not work. But that was just, and not everybody does that.
That's unbelievable. But to note, I mean, it's funny. You gloss over things, but like that in and of itself is a massive decision. I mean, it's at ICL, we talk about daring to dream, but then having the courage to take risks. And when you show leadership, show that through your actions, not your words. So
a part of that is a calculated risk. Like, I wouldn't say everybody go out there and just buy lottery tickets. I do think that it's good to think about like, what are the alternatives? What are the things that you can do to pivot along the way? And I think that went from the original decision about going out to Silicon Valley. If it didn't work, there was always going back to Chicago and doing something. When we were starting with PayPal, when we were doing YouTube, it was always, this was the budget in terms of the financial budget and budget in terms of the time budget. And if any of these two were checked off, then it means like we're done with this and we're going to go back to just working at another job. And it goes back to what I mentioned earlier, like it really takes 3 months to 6 months to be able to figure out whether or not something's going to work. And the biggest thing that I always try to prevent as I'm treading through the steps through life that I don't want in my life is to have regret not doing something, more importantly, like any regret, but regret not doing something. And I just think that at that time with YouTube, I was thinking, should I leave? At the time, I was still working at PayPal, right? And it was, should I leave PayPal, a very good career path, and take all that money that was earned and put it back into something that everybody around you is saying this will never work? Right? You're just going to be burning all the money that you've earned in the last 5-6 years working at PayPal. But I was always thinking, look, if I don't do this, and especially if another company comes along and does the same thing,
you're going to be so annoyed.
Right. Right. And it's just saying like, look, like it's better to see this through. And like, really, if you had an idea that you were passionate about, and it takes 3 months to 6 months to know whether or not you're right or they're right, and to be able to do that, I think it's worth it. And I think like that's the recommendation I have for everybody. Just if you really, especially for the people that have a great idea that they're passionate about, don't let it pass you by and then regret that you never did anything to take that first step.
But you did the work. At the same time, your journey that you just touched upon, I mean, the one-way ticket, you also had a self-belief. There's obviously like you had to have that. And I think here we're talking about taking a leap, but the importance of process. And I'm sure that when you saw the successes coming out of PayPal, your role in it, you had a confidence. You knew that you could. It's a big task to do the back end of what you created. I mean, YouTube, and most humans to be like to figure out all that was needed to even be able to do it is in and of itself big. Then will it hit is a whole nother. But you were in the midst of all of that. So I guess following that path, did you use like a process? And I guess I'll fast forward to today. Like YouTube is huge. You're at another phase in your life now. Do you sort of apply similar processes to everything that you look at from that one-way ticket to the successes to where you are today?
No, for sure. I mean, I think, look, like in 2019, like when I moved out to Asia, this was just a few months before COVID started, right? And that move to Asia was actually just we were remodeling our kitchen in San Francisco in the Bay Area where we lived. And look, it was again like the sort of the path forked in the forest here. Which one do you take? Like there was the easier path, which is keep the kids in the same school, and just rent something nearby, right? Or less traveled upon path, like let's take them to Asia and get them to be able to get probably the only unique experience, exposure to living in a different part of the world. But again, at that time, just like with YouTube started as a dating service, just like PayPal started as like a Palm Pilot service, at that time, it was like, look, it may take 6 months, 12 months, maybe 18 months at the most to finish this remodel of the house, a remodel of the kitchen, sorry, just the kitchen itself. And so I just wanted the kids to be able to experience what it's like to live in Asia for a year. And then we come back and then we resume the rest. And now what? We fast forward like 6 years from 2019 to 2025. First, like 3 months after you get there, COVID starts. And I think in the Bay Area, many of the kids went on, they had to download Zoom, right? They had to do like online classes. But in Taiwan of all places, well, and then on top of that, I mean, any kitchen remodeling work had to stop. And so that was
That
not
was
going
going
to
to be pushed off. So you're like, yeah, maybe we stick around. But your mindset, I remember talking to you about it. And I was always, as friends, the way you asked, we're talking tennis, we're talking about life, you're talking about raising your kids. It seems like I could imagine the same. And that's what I'm kind of getting at. That same process, that same perseverance that you applied in that part is sort of
Yeah,
that
because in hindsight, in 2025, people were thinking like, how did you know that Taiwan wasn't going to have any COVID cases? Like the kids never had to download Zoom, right? Like they just went to classes the entire time. And then they were able to be able to have like the social experience the entire time. They were able to hang out with their peers that entire time. And the question was always like, how did you know? And it was the same thing as PayPal and YouTube and so many of other cases of like flying to Silicon Valley. You don't know.
So you get that question a lot. It's like, you knew about YouTube. Like, how did you, read that crystal ball? And you're like, well, I'm probably not going to answer that it was going to be a dating service. I'm probably going to take, change the answer. But, that's what's so interesting to me, though, looking now at what can spark, right? And now that you have children and they're coming into their older, these formative years and ages, and you can sort of put in and go, wow, you realize as you're sort of implying like your journey is different than others. There's not a one size fits all, not a one pathway, but I think collectively, and that's what this is all about, right? It's mentorship.
I do think that if you were to abstract away, right? And so I can't say like that there's going to be a
Definite guarantee, a money back guarantee.
PayPal 2.0 or a YouTube 2.0. But if you were to abstract away from it, is that especially if I think that in general, people tend to, I think they kind of weigh the risk reward of every decision from small to big in their lives. But I think that people have a tendency to overweight the risk of something. And I think that they're always thinking about the laundry list of things that can go wrong with this, right? And this is to even my own kids as well, is that, look, usually, yes, there is a high risk in a lot of these things that we do. But until you do it, there's only one way to really test this, is to be able to do it. And really that the reward is, of course, enormous. But let's not overweight the risk. Like, if it takes 3 months to know whether this idea of your life that you've been thinking about for years is going to work or not, take those 3 months off from whatever. You can always go back to whatever it is that you were doing before. You can always continue that. But this idea, this is whether you take this or you don't take this, and it's going to be an opportunity of a lifetime lost or earned, right? And so I think about it in those terms. And then when you think about it in sort of top-down approach, then I think that risk reward is like, it makes sense to, and I think in Silicon Valley especially, I see this where I don't see this in a lot of other places, where you have serial entrepreneurs that have failed multiple times. They're still ready to 3 months later, 6 months later, they're ready to get up and do it all over again. And I think that that's something that it's kind of by training, by the ecosystem that you grow up in Silicon Valley. But I think that's great to be able to actually learn something from the mistakes, learn something from the failures.
So isn't that also, that's the athlete mindset as well? I mean, you listen to Roger Federer talk at Dartmouth, talking about, losing more points than winning, and I think that athlete mentality, like, and that was sort of to cap off one of the last questions was, wow, all right. So you won the Super Bowl a couple of times. You're like in the Tom Brady, right? I mean, with different teams, right? PayPal, but then really your baby more at YouTube, but there's still seasons left to play, right? So it's sort of like there's still other seasons, and they were failing, like they were losing seasons, right? Like they didn't win consecutive. No one won, like those Super Bowls were not straight wins. There were like years of not making the playoffs. How did you, and it is to athletes, anyone else, deal with some of those failures? Because I mean, I don't know much. We've never really talked about, but I'm sure that there was something that you tried, or you pivoted, or lessons you would tell your kids in sort of dealing with things, or maybe even at YouTube or other places that you thought it would be one way. And I don't know, are there any things that how you deal with those setbacks?
Well, sure. I mean, I think like even after YouTube, like it was with the co-founder Chad, we've always worked together from the PayPal days to the YouTube days, and we started sort of an incubator of sorts. We bought like a company called Delicious, which was sort of a kind of a social bookmarking app. When you find and encounter something interesting on the web, you get to use this Delicious service to be able to bookmark it, and you can kind of share it with other people, and kind of
Reddit type thing.
Yeah. And so we ended up buying Delicious from Yahoo at the time, getting venture cap funding. And then we just thought, like, is there a way to be able to take this to that next level? And so, but it didn't work out. I still think that, like, the idea was a good enough idea, and I would regret it if I didn't try to do it. And so I think that comes, like, I think in the last 5-6 years, it's been so interesting out there in Asia, especially, with the last, since 2022, with a lot of OpenAI, ChatGPT, with Gemini, with a lot of the AI, and a lot of the underpinnings of the AI is actually on these semiconductors, on the chips, and the biggest global fab for these chips is in Taiwan. It's in TSMC. And so it's been such an interesting period in the last 3-4 years, especially, to see how much of that spotlight TSMC in Taiwan has been getting. But then also from the government of Taiwan standpoint, and it's the first time really working with the government, whereas in Silicon Valley, you're just kind of working with the bankers, the legal system, other entrepreneurs, investors, users. You're not working with the government, but the government there approached me saying, look, we have a lot of these Taiwanese American entrepreneurs that have found success, whether through, and the CEO of NVIDIA, the founder of NVIDIA, right? Jensen, you have AMD, you have a lot of these and newer entrepreneurs that are creating things that are globally impactful. But in Taiwan itself, for the last 30-40 years, other than the semiconductors, they haven't been finding many entrepreneurs, right? And I think they created this system called the Gold Card system, and that was the entrance of how we got to Taiwan, was that they invited us to go back using this Gold Card system. And I helped them launch a system, but the idea was to try to attract talent from other parts of the world, and then being able to maybe connect and utilize some of the resources that Taiwan has, but also maybe the government was saying, like, what are some of the things that we can do on a government, on a country, on a regulatory level that makes, because it has to be more than just a flight from Taiwan to Silicon Valley, that all these successful Taiwanese Americans are successful in Silicon Valley. What's the difference, and what are some of the things that we can do to make these people stay in Taiwan. I get this also, by the way, whenever I go back to Chicago, like there's all these from whether it's Mark Andreessen, Larry Ellison, you have all these folks that are from Chicago that come to Silicon Valley to start something. And Chicago, I remember Mayor Daley was asking at the time, was like, why is it that you guys don't create things back in Chicago? Why fly out to San Francisco? What is so special about San Francisco? And so it has been almost another challenge there in just being able to see, like, can you recreate some of those magical particles of Silicon Valley in another part of the world? And I love doing that right now in Taiwan.
That's so cool to be able to actually, I mean, you went from, I guess, in translating to YouTube, and I know we'll wrap it up, but it's like incredible to think now the next gen is here. They're talking about being YouTubers. Did you see this creator economy coming alive? And now with kids, your own kids being creators, what's your take on like how that's going and this idea of, I mean, there's so much AI, but then the creator economy, it's so great about it. It's not artificial. The idea of YouTube is it's actually you doing it, which I think is something unique sometimes. Or, do you have a sort of take on this, what the future is? Or if you were to predict out as it keeps going, the future of this, YouTube creator?
No, I think Time Magazine, I think they said the person of the year this year was the YouTube of the current YouTube CEO, right? But back 19 years ago, so YouTube just had its 20th anniversary, but 19 years ago, on the front page of Time, the person of the year, we were doing that interview, and the cover was, it looked like a mirror, it was like a reflection, and it was supposed to be you. And the idea of you being you, the content creator, as well as you being the viewer. And I think that model of YouTube, where it kind of blends everybody together, where there's something there to know that the content that you're watching is created by somebody that was you. And so I love hearing this notion that people that are watching the content on YouTube, they aspire to also be one day generating and creating the content, which means that like it's been successful, and Google has been instrumental along this way to be able to say, like, lower those gates, make it open, make it democratic, and make it so anybody that thinks that they have a great idea in terms of content, they can turn on the record button on their phone.
I guess that, obviously being an educator, you've known about ICL since the beginning, but the idea of where do you see, I guess, and you've now experienced your kids in San Francisco, in Taiwan, the future of education and using that. Do you see a future in also educating the creators, right? Like having a way it becomes its own, I mean, curated curriculum per se, to be able to build, like help, like really help move this forward. And the second part is just with AI and everything with YouTube, do you see education shifting, and have you seen shifts between in your kids and where you see education going?
I think it's interesting because I think YouTube is a platform where everybody uploads the content, right? And it's definitely a huge part of it, or what I use YouTube for is a lot of it is learning, is educating myself about things that I'm curious about. And the best way to be able to get access to some of the experts in this domain is through YouTube. So I think that that's a great use for it. But I think that
Sal Khan started on YouTube.
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, I think like YouTube, but then at the same time, it's a democratic system. And I think like that's always been the difficult thing is like deciding like what is the right content to be showing, especially on related or searches. And I'm glad I'm not in those shoes where I have to be deciding how the search works or how the recommendation.
But it's an agora, right? It's a big marketplace. I mean, it's supposed to be that way, right? It's supposed to be that open, like, hey, you create it, you put it out there, see what happens. Let it be democratic.
Yeah, because it is kind of this notion of like, is every video that you're supposed to watch supposed to be 100% accurate in facts, right? And it's supposed to be educational. And I mean, I would argue so much that like so much of what we watch, even on whether it's like a Fox News or Wall Street Journal or whatever, like there's definitely opinions behind who's, it could be the same event that happens, but depending on what channel you're watching or who's writing this article, you can get very different perspectives on it. And I think that that's in a way it's empowering the end individual, like the end user that's watching this content to make their own decisions. But at the same time, with a service like YouTube, where all that content is available through your searching, you have to be a little bit careful to be able to make these judgments yourself on like, okay, is 100% of what I watch on YouTube always factual, or I have to make some of these judgments myself?
So fascinating. But I guess I didn't even think about this, but your kids are now of the age, like, are you like a rock god now? Like now that they're actually, yeah, I always joke where, Novak's kids, he was like, I got to win a slam in front of my kid. Like they got to know that I was actually someone. So is it weird if like your kids are on YouTube and learning? It's like, yeah, that's my jam. That's what I created.
I'll always remember the day that I told my older one, Jaden, was like 15 at the time, but when he was like 5 years old, and I was like, and he, there was like the iPad was relatively new at the time, and he was using it, and he had been watching these videos on YouTube, still like kids videos, and I still remember like thinking to myself, how am I going to tell him that? What did Daddy do? And I remember telling him like, crying to him, say like, full of myself at the time to be able to say like, I can't wait to see his expression of respect and praise for his father. So I was like, I have something to share with you. Like this app that you like, that you're watching this content, YouTube, Daddy was the one that made it, right? And he looked at me bewildered, and I was filled with kind of like, oh, this is the greatest like father feeling that. But then he was like, wow, Daddy, you're like a great actor. How did you get into every single one of these videos? How did you create these
You'd
videos?
rather take Bluey over it. It's like, wait, no, Daddy's not Bluey.
So I mean, there's the thing about like, I mean, I think still like really much on the product, on the engineering side, but in terms of content creation, even having created like some of the first cat videos ever uploaded on YouTube, I don't think I have any views on those videos.
Isn't that amazing? But I guess now they're older. But is there an appreciation? I mean, and that's my kind of wrap up question, is really about like going back, giving advice to your own kids or to kids watching anything that I mean, you've kind of covered a lot about it, but I think, in believing in yourself and taking the risks and any other perspective that you would gain. And it's pretty great to see you. And we've never really talked about it. So having this opportunity to sort of see your journey trace back, it's pretty cool. And, I wish you could have a redo, maybe if your son was older. I think there'd be a different take now, if it was a 15-year-old that's watching YouTube all the time. It's like, by the way, that's what I created. So I don't know, anything that you would share? Because I think people would really love to kind of get your 2 cents on it.
No, I mean, I think from like multiple perspectives, like you mentioned just now, right? Like a sort of different ages and from like what viewing angle you're going through. There's definitely no hesitation in saying like, no regrets in doing what I did and like taking that one-way flight out from Chicago to the Bay Area, or joining a company like that was doing Palm Pilot payment services at the time and burning so much of that capital, going through the dot-com crash, all that like ended up doing well. But I think like it all still comes back to like, look, like that ability to be able to just judge like the right decisions, but just don't always say no to anything that has some risk to it. And I think that comes in, it's not just when it comes to creating startups when you have to make those decisions. I imagine people that are watching this, like even when it comes to your daily, everyday, you have to make these decisions dozens, hundreds of times every day about, do I do this or do I do this at this time? How do I make these decisions? And I think it's just making those decisions in a way that's thinking about like that balance between risk and reward, right? And I think it's important to be able to reflect that properly.
And you put the work in. I mean, bottom line, we kind of skimmed over it, but you had put the work in. A lot of people are athletes. It's like you can't miss steps, right? If you really trace back the steps, you were able to see and gain nuggets along the way, but also your ability to rise up as someone in your position. There are a lot of people wanting to be CTOs or, in those same roles, and you were able to put the work in and do a better job and be able to be this creator yourself. I mean, you were a creator and are. It's awesome, man. I really appreciate this. I feel bad that we weren't able to do it with more kind of kids and students, because asking questions, you probably get great questions. There's so many more, but I just love catching up and hearing your story. So I'm so impressed at, not in the founding of YouTube, but the perspective and who you are as a person, because you've represented so much. I mean, you give back, just looking at how to help Taiwan. And I know your mentorship and what education means to you and what, since YouTube that social entrepreneurship. And, you never asked to have your name in lights, but you do so much, both behind the scenes and to give back. And it's, I'm really proud to have you as a friend and being able to help inspire the next generation to build champions for life, right? I mean, we all want our kids to be of good character and not necessarily follow all that we did, but I really appreciate you giving this talk and giving
No,
this.
absolutely. I can't wait to see, yeah, what my own kids, as well as some of the people that are watching this, what they end up doing in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years.
I can't wait. Well, Steve Chen, thanks so much for being here. Super, super appreciate it.